Welcome to Pioneer Mindset, a place where we challenge our mindset and address the discomfort in both business and life by finding clarity resulting in bold conviction. I'm your host, Garrett Ruskamp, fifth generation farmer, husband, and father from rural Nebraska. Whether you're navigating frustration from past decisions or worry about the uncertainty you face today in your business, we're going to learn from our struggles and take on new challenges with a resilient mindset. Join me as I share my journey of struggles I faced in agriculture as a farmer and family man. I'm ready to dive into honest conversations to tackle the mindsets surrounding key issues that rural ag business owners face that will ultimately help you gain control, leading to a profitable and sustainable business. Let's adapt to Pioneer Mindset and get to it. Welcome back, everyone, to this week's episode on Pioneer Mindset. Going to be diving into what I would call a hot topic around agriculture, around farming, ranching, whatever the case is, and that's farm transition and succession planning, right? Rarely is this not a sensitive issue. More commonly, it's avoided than resolved. And so, everywhere I go, I have these conversations around transition planning, and it's just always kind of a hot topic, always something that everybody wants to know the answer to. Everybody wants to know how we can go about this process and actually get this thing resolved, right? I think it's really avoided a lot of times just because it's so uncomfortable. And why is it uncomfortable? We got to think back to, why is it so uncomfortable to talk about transition planning? Is it because somebody is dying, passing away? That's obviously uncomfortable. And maybe somebody, it's going from assets from me to you, or just trying to figure out, maybe it's the management, maybe it's the control. There's so much going on. And so there's just so much uncomfortableness around this. And that's why I feel like it's really hard to have these conversations. It's really hard to do them effectively and to have the conversations that we need to have, right? Because it's so, what I said before, uncomfortable. And so while I may not necessarily be an expert in family dynamics or, a practicing attorney, I do know that this whole process starts with the knowledge and understanding. All right. Farm transition starts with knowledge of numbers. Okay. And so that's really what we're going to be kind of diving into, because this phrase here kind of sums up everything that I'm going to be coming back to several times: is clear is kind and unclear is unkind. All right. So when we get to kind of diving into this, thinking about your own personal situation, wherever you're at, whatever that consists of, where are you at? Right? Where are you currently at? Whenever you hear the words transition planning or succession planning or estate planning, legacy planning, all that other mumbo jumbo, those hot topics around there, where are you at in that process? What shoes are you currently in? All right. Are you in the shoes of, maybe your parents are trying to figure out their succession plan? Maybe the generation before them, like even your grandparents, have passed away, or maybe they're going to be passing away at some point here in the near future. And so seeing what some of that's going to be playing out. So you're going to have like that firsthand experience as to how, different assets and the legacy that they built is going to be transitioned down basically from one generation to the next, from that person to the next person, right? And so what shoes are you currently in? Are you the person that's trying to call the shots, that's trying to set things up for yourself, trying to figure out how can we successfully do the best that we can to pass this down, make sure everybody gets along and all this other fun stuff? Where are you at in this process? All right, have you started it? Have you had anything established? Or is it all in fine print already and it's all signed and ink is dry and there's nothing to worry about? Is all hunky-dory? Everything's going to be perfect? Or are you sitting down? Are you trying to have these uncomfortable conversations? All right. Are you in the intense meetings with family and trying to figure out what this looks like? Are you trying to figure out how to divide your assets among your kids so that way they get along and they all get along, can come together at Easter and Christmas and be all, like I said, hunky-dory, right? So, have you started? Is it complete? And if it's not, why haven't you completed yet? Why haven't you started the process? Why haven't you had these uncomfortable conversations? And where at? Just asking yourself, why have we not gone down this path? Why have we not completed this? And so just thinking about where you are currently at, wherever that's it, wherever you're at, it doesn't matter. But just thinking through that as we go through this conversation. All right. And then I guess we got to ask ourselves at the end of the day, what's at stake, right? What happens if nothing happens? What happens if you keep on going back to the default of being, this is uncomfortable and I'm just not going to take action? Right. So I always kind of bring that up as kind of the importance of the conversation as to why are we going to actually need to be taking a lot of these things into consideration. And ultimately, what is at stake if we do nothing? Because doing nothing at the end of the day is a choice in itself. Okay. And so, what happens if nothing changes? If you don't take the action, if we don't have the uncomfortable conversations, what happens? All right. Is it just going to be set up with that one page document of your, quote unquote will that you set up 20, 30 years ago and just kind of let it be what it is? Gonna let the siblings fight once you all die, or you're gonna leave it how mom and dad set up, or just divide it equally, or what are you gonna do? Or is it, and even like the transition part, to secession part, when it comes to the power and control, you're gonna just maintain it and control as long as you can. And then, once you die, you're dead, right? It doesn't matter, right? Those are the things that we need to kind of keep into consideration. What happens? What's at stake here? And I think the big thing here to highlight is, as we all know, your legacy is at stake, right? It's called legacy planning, right? So your legacy is at stake. And the legacy could be the land, it could be your skill sets, you could be your relationships, it could be the business that you've built, it could be lots of things, it could be whatever you want it to be. Legacy does not just have to be land or assets, by the way. And I think we get that commonly confused. So, really the big thing here is your legacy is at stake. All right. And as I was thinking about this before I hit record, as I was thinking about like big picture here, why is this important? Why is this important to try to get this, not perfect, but try to dial this in to where it's going to be something that, quote unquote, could be successful. Right. And really, I think what it comes down to is a lot of the generations in the past, and I shouldn't even say that, a lot of the farms in the past, the operations in the past, whether if they did not get this successfully transitioned right, I feel like that's to where all of a sudden we start having less and less farms out there. To where it makes it hard for junior or juniorette to come back to the operation and have a viable operation there so they can carry on the legacy and kind of keep in the farming industry, the ag industry. If we don't set this up properly, your plan that you put in place or lack thereof a plan could be the demise of your legacy, that could be the demise of small town America, of farmers and ranchers itself. All right, so there's a lot of weight that comes on this. And that's part of also why it's probably so uncomfortable, is because of all the weight that comes on this. If you're the one making the decisions, trying to figure out how you're going to pass on your legacy, the empire that you built, everything that you've established, and all that control that goes with that, and you've got all that weight on your shoulders because you want to do the best job that you can. You know what I mean? So that's probably part of why it's so uncomfortable. But if we just put this off, and if it doesn't happen the way that we want it to, and this could ultimately mean like there's just less farmers coming back because it's not setting them up for success. Okay. So, there's a lot of different areas that we could dive into here, but I think it's important to establish why we need to actually have these uncomfortable conversations, and we don't just want to just let things play out, right? What happens if nothing changes? Default mode, going back to your just comfort zone and not taking that action, right? Nothing changes if nothing changes. So let's kind of talk about, where does a guy start here when it comes to transition planning? Where does a guy start, or even kind of, where do we go? And so going back to kind of almost the title of this, farm transition starts with knowledge of numbers. Knowledge of numbers. I want to break this down and try to really keep it simple, not get lost in the weeds, and not give you a plan, a step-by-step, play-by-play as to what you need to do to be successful. One, because I don't think that exists. But two, just because we need to keep this simple just to kind of get your wheels turning as to what you can do. So let's break it down. Let's keep this simple. So you first got to ask, where are you at now? And I already asked that too. So hopefully you're already thinking about that. Hopefully you're already thinking about, well, as of right now, we're currently in the season of, grandma and grandpa just passed away. So all of their assets are kind of getting settled right now. And so it's going down to my parents, and we're kind of seeing how that's playing out and seeing, is there going to be anything that's eventually even going to be passed down to us? What do I have for siblings, and what does that look like? Do mom and dad have something established? And is it clear cut and dry? Is it clear? So it's kind, you know what I mean? And so just kind of asking, where are you at now? Have you started your own process? No matter if you're 20 years old, just out of school, or maybe you've got a family, maybe you've got a large family, it doesn't matter. There's always a good time to start that process. So where are you at now? Have you started your own process of getting your own estate and your own kind of planning put in place? So where are you at now? A simple question. Simple question. Once we answer that, now we go to number two. Where would you like to be? All right, where would you like to be? This one's probably a lot harder. How would you like things to play out? Best case scenario, what would you like to see? And if we don't answer that, if we don't have something that we're shooting for, it's really going to be hard to fill out that in between. How do we get from point A to B if we don't know where point B actually is? So, kind of all about setting that goal there of where do we want to be? We got to have the starting place, which is where we're at now. But where do we want to be? Plan B, or going from A to B. We got to know where that is so we know what we're shooting our sights on. So we know how to get there. And we got to have, and then all of a sudden now you can start to build a roadmap out. This is a journey. And a lot of times we don't know where the hell we're actually going. And so it's hard to figure out how to get there. Right. And so where would you like to be and how would you like things to play out? Where would you like to be in 5, 10 years, having everything settled or not settled, but just the plan in place? Where would you like to be? Just having that goal in mind. Right. So then now we can start to work on that process of how to get there, that middle part, the messy part that's not very fun, but we can't dive into that if we don't know where we're trying to go. And that's the really hard part because you're like, well, things change. Life changes 10 years down the road. My business is going to be a different spot where, family's going to be a different spot. Who knows what the economy is going to be, all that stuff, yada, 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 all that BS that rambles in our head that keeps us from actually doing anything and taking action. I know what that's like, right? Because, we've all been there. But we got to answer that. We got to answer to some extent, got to put some sort of target out there, some sort of goal that we're shooting for, some sort of destination so we can actually start the journey of trying to get there. And so moving on here, when it comes to as far as, where else to start, what do we do from here? Well, really think about this. When's the last time that you went into any sort of meeting where it was some sort of planning? Maybe it's with the attorney, maybe it was with the accountant, the banker, just anybody kind of overall high level overview working on the business, all right, working on those things to think about the future and plan ahead. We all have the meetings from time to time. When's the last time you went to one of those meetings and they didn't care about the numbers? Probably not very often, right? When it comes back to knowing your numbers, that's what I'm trying to get at here is we got to start with knowing your numbers. And that's the first part here when it comes to this farm transition, this legacy transition, all this other stuff. It all starts with knowing the numbers. Okay. And so that's what I meant earlier when it says, I'm not an expert when it comes to all this stuff. I'm not licensed in law and all that other fun stuff. But at the end of the day, it all starts with knowing your numbers. And if we don't know our numbers, we don't know how to get from point A to point B. All right. And so that's why it's important to really focus on that. It all starts with understanding and knowing exactly where you're at. Okay. So what are we talking about here? And so I want to actually take a sidestep on this and share kind of some things that we've been going through and kind of share something that might be a little bit relatable and kind of a story here around this side of things. So without giving you a lot of the details, but also kind of cluing you in. So in our operation right now, my grandma had passed away about a year and a half ago. And so that whole her estate and everything was getting settled and all that other fun stuff. And so, now we're in the process of these uncomfortable conversations, right? We're talking with family. We're trying to figure out how, everything that they had set up, how it's actually going to play out. What's it going to look like moving forward? Is there anything that we need to change? Is there any sort of like, buyout of those that inherited, their portion of the estate? What does that actually look like? And so a lot of really just uncomfortable conversations. But going back to the number side, because that's what I'm trying to focus on here, going back to the numbers, and having these uncomfortable conversations, I can tell you it helps a lot going into those when you know exactly where your financial position actually is and what you're trying to do. Okay. And I say that from both sides because I've been on both sides. All right. I've gone into the meeting where I did not actually have a lot of clarity and it's hard to see what the future looks like. And so maybe we're a little bit scared to actually put those numbers down on paper. Maybe we're scared to face that truth of where we're actually sitting right now, whether it be good, bad, or ugly. In most cases, it's maybe not as good as we want it to be. All right. And so maybe we're just scared to actually put that pen to paper and actually have the exact numbers. And so with that, without having those exact numbers, there's just a lot of uncertainty that bleeds through. All right. And then going back to that phrase that clear is kind and unclear is unkind. Well, when you're being unclear, you're being unkind. And when you're being unkind, that's what causes a lot of uncomfortable conversations. That's what causes a lot of friction, a lot of butting heads, a lot of people just not fully understanding. The communication is not good when you are unkind or unclear. All right. And so that's what it kind of comes down to is making sure that we know our financial position so that way we can have these clear conversations. All right. Can have clear communication. So now, whether it be just knowing exactly what the balance sheet looks like, assets, liabilities, knowing exactly who owns what, and how that affects your position, how that affects your position going forward, once things have actually transitioned and played out and people got their inheritance, you know what I mean? And so as ownership changes, what does that look like going forward? Just really breaking that down. And so when when we don't have the facts or are uncertain about the numbers, we allow our emotions to take over. All right, so I'm going to say that again. When we don't have the facts or are uncertain about the numbers, we allow our emotions to take over. And by the way, same can be said about not knowing what the end goal is. If we don't know what that end goal is, it's pretty easy for our emotions to take over. And so when that our emotions take over, then conversations get kind of out of hand. Maybe we say things that we don't want to or say things we don't mean. And it leads other people's to do the same thing. Right. When you're in a meeting, especially in our family, got quite a few family members involved. And the more people involved, the more emotions involved. So if you are, say, the one in charge of that, or just even in charge of, quite frankly, your own emotions and controlling your thoughts and words and actions, right? If we don't go into that with a lot of certainty and confidence and know the facts about your position, your situation, but those, how everything's going to be affecting you, all right, it's pretty easy for you to get emotional. And once you get emotional, everybody gets emotional and then everything gets kind of out of hand. And so this really kind of comes down to, like I said, having that clarity, but then having the ability to take those numbers and then, if needed, just relay them on to others, right? Relay on the message, having a good, clear way to let other people know. And so another kind of comment here, and this is where I see, this whole transition side of things and this really playing back to the numbers and really making sure people fully understand. So I'm going to flip this because I see a lot of people on the other side of this to where maybe they're like my age or they're kind of junior that's coming back to the family operation and they're trying to decide, hey, that dad's getting older, maybe he's getting up in his 50s, 60s, maybe older, and he's trying to figure out what he's going to do. He wants to retire sometime. So we're going to come back to the operation, try to carry on that family name and legacy, right? And under the kind of ideal that, hey, by the way, this is all going to be yours someday, right? Hey, this is going to be yours someday. Come back and work for me. We'll work out the details later. Just come back and work for me. Carry on the family legacy. Have that pride in everything you're doing in farming and ranching, and agriculture and production. And we'll work out the details later. I mean, don't worry, it'll be yours. Don't worry about it. All right. But then all of a sudden we figure out, we come back and we devote, a decade or half a lifetime and a growing family to an operation that may not be able to sustain you long term. Yeah, just because the workload's there doesn't mean that it's going to actually be sustainable and viable long term and even profitable. To make a lot of this transition planning a lot easier definitely helps if your operation is profitable, right? And so that's where we see a lot of hardships really come into play. If that, say, that generation before you that you come back to, for example, is not in a great place. By the way, if you're the generation that's trying to bring your son or daughter back as well, we need to make sure that goes smoothly as well. Same thing. That's where, in my mind, like I said, coming back to where transition starts is just knowing the numbers, knowing whether you have an operation that's viable, knowing what you can do and you cannot do. Obviously, we don't have 100% certainty because this is life. Things happen. I get that. All right. But at the end of the day, this comes back to making sure that we have an idea as to how things are going to play out, good, bad, or ugly. What happens? What happens if this doesn't work out when I bring Junior back? What happens if we can't sustain this debt load that we take on when we maybe try to put together an expansion to get Junior back to the operation? Hey, by the way, I know about that. I know about that. I know what it's like to, hey, we got this family legacy here. We got this. We want to bring Junior back. So let's take on this expansion in order to take him in, right? So that way we have enough revenue to support multiple families and multiple different people there, right? Family dynamics. And so going back to our operation, coming back to where we took on a lot of debt and did not have that financial integrity to do so, did not fully know what the numbers were. And by doing so, it was almost our own demise. It was almost to where we dug our own hole just by not knowing the numbers. So going back to this, can't hit on this enough. It's just, this all starts with knowing the numbers and knowing that clarity, knowing exactly where you're sitting and the end goal that you're shooting for. Where are you at now? And what are you shooting for? What is that end goal, right? And so that's really what I'm trying to hit home here. And by the way, knowledge is power and power is certainty. And I think we could all agree that we just like a little bit more certainty in what we're trying to do. Well, by the way, you can get that just by gaining that extra knowledge and power, all right? Understanding what the numbers actually look like. All right, a few other things to kind of think about here, kind of building upon this. So how do we get that clarity? What do we do now? What do we need to know? And so I'm going to kind of come back here and, like I said, trying to keep this somewhat high level so it's not a 2-hour long episode, but kind of going back to knowing your numbers, knowing that clarity and trying to get that clarity, that knowledge and power. So I'd say it comes back to the 3 critical components of any business, of anything that you're trying to do. your balance sheet, your cash flow, and your cost of production. Those are your three critical components that we need to manage as business owners. And by the way, you are a business owner if you are a farmer or rancher, right? If this is something that you're not getting a wage from somebody else, if you're trying to build your own legacy, if you're trying to get income from whatever you're trying to do, you have a business. So you need to manage these three critical components: balance sheet, cash flow, and cost of production. We need to analyze each of those, and each of those is going to be affecting this transition side. Really important, the balance sheet, assets, liabilities. What do you have for assets? Yeah, maybe you have a lot of land, but what do you have for debt out there? Does your family, do your kids want your debt? Think about that. Think about that. We always think about the asset side of things, the legacy, the land. We always think about that when it comes to transition planning. What about the debt? What about the debt if you pass away tomorrow? What debt load do you have that's going to be transferred on, transitioned down to somebody else, whether it be your wife or your kids, or what does that look like? So we never generally think about the debt side of things, but we got to know that information. We got to know what's actually out there. What does this actually look like? So balance sheet, number one, critical component number one. Cash flow, what does that look like? Are you cash flow positive? Why are you cash flow positive? Are you cash flow negative? And why is that? Are you taking too much of a wage right now? Back to the cash flow, that's where we can start looking at, further ahead, what do you need and different things like that. And so this kind of takes me to my next point, kind of skipping ahead a little bit here, but analyzing all these three critical components in their current state, but also thinking about the future. So what will I need? What will my parents need? What will my kids need? Right. So that goes back to that cash flow. Are you cash flow positive now enough to say bring on the next generation, to take a hit in the market and still be able to carry on and still be able to survive? Are you profitable enough to where you don't have to take a wage, but your son or daughter who's got a growing family who's going to have more living expenses and just overall going to need more money than what you are you able to actually take less of a wage? Are you able to actually fund enough to say have retirement? And what does that look like? Is your son or daughter going to need to continue to basically fund your retirement? What does that look like? And same thing for the kids. If you're that age, what are your kids going to need? They can't live off of nothing. They can't just farm for nothing in the hopes that they're going to be able to inherit this someday. You know what I mean? And that's BS, right? So a lot of kids come back to the farm. A lot of juniors and juniorettes come back. They build up this lifestyle. They're trying to grow their own family, all for pennies on the dollar, that they're just going to be able to take this thing over someday. By the way, you can't survive on equity. You need cash to pay the bills. All right. So what do your kids need? What do they need? What do you need? And so just being able to answer these questions, it all kind of stems back to the cash flow. But then furthermore, looking at the cost of production. The cost of production, just another way to kind of analyze, are we profitable? What do we need to do to be more profitable? And by the way, if we're taking on, say we're bringing Junior back to the operation and we got to pay him a wage, we got to make sure that there's enough for family living. How is that going to affect the cost of production? Is that going to take us from, yeah, we might be profitable now. So yeah, let's come back, Junior, right? But then all of a sudden he comes back and he's got a salary. He's got an extra pickup. He's got extra expenses. All of a sudden now we're not profitable. Our cost of production is negative. Our break even is negative, right? So there's a lot of things there to really kind of consider when it comes back to the number side of things, right? What are some changes that also could be a problem that could be coming down the road? Thinking about something that's potential right there. You know what I mean? So, looking down the road, okay, well, maybe your dad inherited everything from, maybe his only sibling, got everything from his parents, everything was kind of passed on to him. Okay, but now you got three siblings. Okay, and so what does that dynamic look like? Or what are some problems that could be coming down the road? Can we do anything about it? Can we change anything? Some of those plans are set in place. We can't go back and change wills. We can't go sweet talk grandma into giving you all the land or something like that. You know what I mean? A lot of those things may be set in place. So asking ourselves the simple question of what can we do about it? What can we change? What can we control? Okay, if this is what it is, that's fine. Maybe there's some different options out there we can rearrange, or maybe there's something that we can change. Just asking ourselves, what can we do about it? And seeing those potential challenges that could be coming your way. All right, so those are a lot of the things that I want you to kind of be thinking about as we talk about this transition planning, as this kind of rolls in your head, wherever you're at in the day and in this cycle of things. What can you ultimately be doing? Okay, and it all starts with kind of going back to those three critical components, analyzing where you're at now, and also thinking about the future, making sure that we're not forgetting about the future, because that'll happen as well. Like I said, going back to that cost of production, we might look at, hey, we're pretty good right now. We're doing pretty good, but what happens in the future? We won't think about that. That's tomorrow's problem, right? No, that's today's problem, because soon tomorrow will be today. So just want to make sure that we're not forgetting about a lot of those things, and it all kind of comes back to the numbers. All right. So now I want to actually take another turn here before we kind of look at closing this out. I think this is important to also ask, what would you do differently in the future? And so, wherever you're at, if you're kind of seeing the transition of, say, your parents or your grandparents or their estate kind of play out, maybe just ask yourselves, what are some things that you like about it? What would you do different? What did you learn? What did you like? What did you not like? What would you do differently? Different things like that. All right. Maybe it's like, well, geez, well, I saw that they split things evenly, and then that wasn't fair to the on farm sibling. Or maybe you saw the neighbor down the road and he just gave everything to the on farm kid and the off farm's got nothing. Well, I mean, is that good or not? Or, just not even from the business standpoint. You could also look at this from a family dynamic standpoint. Did they still continue to meet for Christmas and for Easter after everything was all said and done? Or did this literally break the entire family? We all talk about when it comes to this is families first, right? Family is first until, grandma and grandpa pass away and then all gloves come off and everything's free for all. And so that's why we, just thinking about, what would you change? What would you do differently? And then using that, just kind of learning from it. At the end of the day, just trying to learn from it so that way you can do things better yourself. That's where I'd say like my generation is at right now, or even that generation where we're just watching things play out and we're trying to learn from how things actually played out, whether it be good, bad, or ugly, and just trying to learn, hey, what would I do differently? What would I do for my own kids' sake? What have others done that have worked or haven't worked? What are their challenges? Because everybody's got a story around this. Every single person out there, everybody listening to this has a story around this. So what worked? What didn't work? What did you like? What did you not like? What would you do differently? All right. And making sure we use that information to build that plan, to have some actually takeaways rather than just, like I said, sitting back and doing nothing. And nothing changes if nothing changes. You and I both know that. So making sure that we can actually learn from those different experiences and learn from others as well. So as we get to kind of rounding this out today, I, just want to kind of close on a few things here. So asking yourself, what are some kind of key takeaways? Are you being kind right now with whatever you're doing, with the conversations you're having, or maybe not having, by the way? Are we being kind? What I'm asking there is if you're being kind, are you being clear? Or if you're being unkind, maybe you're unclear. Or if you're unclear, you're probably not kind. All right. I think we all want to be kind in these conversations. We all want to be civil. We want to all make sure we can still get together, keep that family dynamic, a positive relationship there. We never want to taint that. But asking ourselves, are we being kind? We might think we are, but if we're being unclear, we are being unkind. So do you have the clarity to be kind? That's the big one there is, do you have the clarity that you need to be kind? Right? Yeah. Our intentions, like I said, are to be kind, are to be mindful of what others, the shoes that they're in, the position that they're in, the perspectives that they have. Everybody's going to have different perspectives. Our intentions might be to be kind to them, but if we don't have the clarity, how can we be kind? All right. So do you like the way that things are currently going as you kind of see? If not, what are you going to do about it? Do something. All right. If you don't like the way that things are going, if you don't like the fact that you haven't put anything together, do something about it. If you don't like the way that, your grandparents did things, do something about it for your generation. Do something about it for things that you can control. At the end of the day, is just trying to drive that action to you. Okay. So we just need to make sure that we're doing the best job that we can here. And the last thing that I'll touch on here, last but not least, but progress over perfection. All right. Do not get caught up in that, well, this is not perfect. I'm just not going to send it to the lawyer attorney. We're not going to meet on it because it's not perfect. And this is going to change here in 2 years anyway. So why do it now? Right? Do not get caught up on perfect. Progress needs to be over perfection when it comes to this. All right. You can always change and adjust. You can always kind of go back and adjust or change things as life changes, as it will. Okay. But if we have this mentality that I'm just going to wait till it's perfect, it's never going to happen. And when it never happens, we go back to that default mode because we're just uncomfortable. And when nothing happens and nothing changes. All right. And so that's ultimately asking ourselves, what's at stake here? And what's at stake if this doesn't happen? And so making sure that we have that in the back of our mind, because if we just sit here and we wait for perfection, it might be the demise of our operation. It might be the demise of the legacy that we're trying to build. It might be the one thing that actually takes us under by waiting for perfection rather than progress. All right. Rather than progress. Progress, by the way, is getting you a little bit closer to that end goal. You may never get there. But getting you closer so that way you can feel comfortable about where you're at within that journey. And so If this is anything that kind of like strikes home for you as far as like, I feel like I'm trying to be kind, but I still don't have a lot of clarity. If you'd like to find that clarity, that knowledge, and really that understanding back for your operation, back for your position, back for your family and your legacy that you're trying to build and leave behind, if you're trying to get to that point, it'll help mitigate any unnecessary stress and confusion that you might be dealing with. And ultimately, maybe just kind of looking for a little bit of help, a little bit of guide down this process. That's exactly what we can help you do with Pioneer Farmer. That's exactly what we do within this transition planning. Is it all starts with the numbers. It all starts with knowledge and power of the numbers and that clarity that we're trying to get for our own operation, that clarity that's going to allow you to be kind. That's going to allow you to do the best job that you can at making progress towards that goal that you're going to establish, towards that destination. Once you make that progress towards there of trying to protect your legacy, making sure that things play out the way that you want them to. All right, making sure that we can do our best if the plan is to get the legacy to carry on, to get the farm to carry on. Let's do what we can to get to that point. All right, let's make progress over perfection, and let's finally get some clarity back into our operation. All right, so reach out to us here at Pioneer Farmer. Reach out to me. I'd love to have that conversation to see how we can get that clarity back to your operation and ultimately help you make better decisions, help you work down this process of transition planning. That's all I got for now. Look forward to talking to you guys soon, and we'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for tagging along with me today as we sharpened our mindsets. If you've gained insight from today's episode, be sure to take a screenshot to share or send this episode to somebody who might also find value in it. For more, follow me on Instagram @HereAtRustCamp or on Facebook, and join me next time for more conviction through clarity.